Now, when did they get involved in actually the west side of South Boston?
It was back in the early 70s, I believe.
Okay.
I had been there full-time since 1971, when I graduated high school.
Yeah.
After a short jaunt out west, I decided to join my dad's company, and we stayed there. And I ended up running that until 1987. But those were exciting years. I mean, they were the years of forced busing.
Right.
That's another thing, maybe we'll get a chance to talk about.
Oh, yeah. It's 10:15 right now. We're going to take a quick break. Be back with Tom Cirignano, the constant outsider. South Boston. Owned a shop in South Boston, an auto repair dealership, gas dealership, and got some wild stories. Be right back with more of Anything Goes right after this. And at 10:19, Anything Goes. Bob Folcik here till 11 o'clock. My guest, Tom Cirignano, author of The Constant Outsider, growing up running a garage in South Boston. Very interesting stuff. Tom, how do people, first of all, get a hold of your book?
Well,
it's out there. I know it's available locally. You have a website. Why don't you give contact information right now?
Yeah, it's easy to see what the book's all about if you want to go to the website, theconstantoutsider.com, with no spaces. And you can actually go to the media page and go through a gallery of photos. And there's also an excerpt of the book that you can read there. But you can order the book through that. It's always available at Amazon and Barnes & Noble, any online retailer.
You can go up to our good friend Eric Easterday up and read more books, too.
Yeah, read more books here in Taunton on Winthrop Street has the book, and Something's Brewing in Lakeville at the intersection of 18 and 105.
Your library.
Yeah.
Right.
Very nice.
All right, 508-822-1106. The phone lines are open. If you have a question for Tom, you want to ask him questions about this fascinating book, give us a call, 508-822-1106. Okay, so you're growing up in the shop, seen some strange things. Now you get into your teenage years. And when did you how old were you when you took the shop over from you?
Well, my dad retired, semi-retired pretty early at around 55. And so I had a lot of the responsibilities I took over, the bookkeeping and learning to be a mechanic. And that mushroomed, and eventually he just didn't come in that much anymore. So, yeah, I was pretty young when I took it over.
Okay. And what was your first encounter with some of the seedier elements in South Boston? We hear, you and I were talking during a break, and I let you know, I'm kind of fascinated by the subculture contained within organized crime, in the way, especially in the Italian version of it, the mafia, okay?
Yeah.
And, we're talking primarily the Irish organized crime in Southie, but just their love of family, as long as the family doesn't do something to cause them not be in favor with the family
You
anymore.
just keep your mouth shut and your nose clean, that's all.
And the religious element of them, how religious they are, and there's such contradictions between how they live their life in their
it's amazing.
Quote, 9 to 5 job, or that could be 9 at night to 5 in the morning.
And that's exactly what it is, a job.
Right, and that's what amazes me, is the contradiction between what they consider their vocation.
Well, you said the first encounter. That's interesting, because the first encounter I had with organized crime was with a bookie joint that was basically attached to the back of my shop. We had a concrete wall that was separating us from a 3-decker home in South Boston. Right. And since I was a little kid, my dad used to send me down there to place bets for him. I would get down there as a 7 or 8-year-old, knock at the door. I had a special knock.
Special knock?
Oh, yeah, you had a special knock. The guy would check you out through the peephole, and they would bang, bang, unlock all the locks and let you in. And I'd say, yeah, my dad wants to bet $1,000 on solicitation or whatever, in the 5th race at Suffolk. I was a little kid doing this. So it was second nature. It didn't seem that strange to me, but that was definitely organized crime, and that was my first encounter with it.
And did you know back then that this was really illegal?
Well, never really thought about it as being illegal, because, I could see the steady flow of people going into that building, and a lot of them were pretty well-known, respected citizens of the city. I mean, nothing against firemen, but a lot of firemen like to go in there and place their bets, things like that. I won't say cops. I don't think I ever saw a cop go in there. But a lot of people like to gamble. It was a service that was offered, and that's what they...
And that was in the suburbs, too. I mean, back then, okay. I remember growing up in
was.
Taunton here, and, you know, there were the bookies around. There were places you want to place your bets. And, you know.
Even in Braintree, I ran into a lady that was taking numbers and wanted me to run numbers for her when I was about 16, 17 years old.
Right.
So it was funny. But, you know, as time went by, I started meeting other characters. And when you're a good mechanic, our shop was, I'd like to pride myself on being an honest shop. And people find that out, so even gangsters like to trust their mechanic. So I certainly started to attract a lot of interesting clients over the years. I mean, I would put inspection stickers on a car, and there would be a 357 Magnum in the glove compartment next to a roll of $100 bills about as thick as your fist, and they trusted me that I wasn't going to touch that stuff. But, you know, things like that.
It's good to have that trust, I guess.
Oh, yeah.
Otherwise, it turns on you quickly.
But then they start offering you opportunities.
Right.
You know, this is where you have to be very careful. My dad worked years to have a good reputation, and I didn't want to ruin that reputation. So a lot of times they would ask me, would you be willing to let me park a truck in here tonight? You know, they were going to maybe hijack a truck full of cigarettes or booze, and they wanted to park it in my... I could put a bus in the back bay of mine. So it was a very desirable thing to have at their disposal. But I would say no, because I had never played ball with them, and I was able to say no. Once you let them do something for you, then you don't have that option anymore.
Right.
So.
Interesting. Fascinating.
Yeah,
stuff.
and then they wanted me to hold high-stakes poker games. You know, I was working on a guy's car. He was an enforcer from the west side of Southie. Very nice, soft-spoken guy, but he weighed like 300 pounds, and, you know, I'm sure that if he wanted to, he could be really tough with somebody.
He didn't own a cheese shop, did he?
No. No, he wasn't Italian. He was Irish.
Oh, okay.
And
that's right.
I loved the Irish
You were the
people,
only
believe
Italian
it.
in South Boston at that time.
But you know something? I grew to love the Irish people. Especially around St. Patrick's Day, they welcomed me into their homes.
Right.
I was like part of the family. It was great. But anyway, this enforcer, I'm leaning over, changing his spark plugs. He says, you know, Tom, he says, I was asked to ask you if you would consider holding a high-stakes poker game in your back room like once a month, you know, like on a Friday night. And I says, really? What do you mean? He says, oh, it would just be the heavy hitters, and you would get to keep 10% of every pot. He says, all you have to do is supply the tables and the drinks. And it doesn't matter who wins. If they gamble $1,000, I'd get $100 out of that pot.
Right.
And I'll tell you, I says, geez, let me think about that.
Has to be tempting.
Let me think about that overnight. The next day he came in to get my answer, and I told him, you know, I says, I'm not interested. I don't want to do that. And he didn't try to pressure me. And that was another opportunity. You just have to say no. Yeah. And some really strange opportunities came up that you would never expect to happen.
Has to be tempting, though. I mean,
It was very tempting. You can get involved in illegal activity without even knowing it, Bob. These guys started bringing in these cars from New York and telling me that it was their uncle's car, and they were trading it in, and they didn't want to leave the nice tires on it.
Just don't check the trunk.
Yeah. Well, actually, it got to the point where they said, you can check the trunk, and anything that's in there you can keep.
Oh.
Then I knew that this was not a good operation.
Right.
And I tried to figure out a way to get out of it, and I wrote about that in the book, how I utilized the local police, friends of mine, to get me out of that situation because they wouldn't stop bringing these cars to me.
Right.
And I did not want to be on the 6 o'clock news as a strip shop, you know. But they started innocently. It was my uncle's car. We're trading it in. The next day they got another car from New York. It's their aunt's car, and they want the tires off of that too.
It's obvious. They have a big family.
Yeah, and if, you know, maybe we'll take the radio, you know. Like, holy mackerel.
508-822-1106. Fascinating stuff. This stuff amazes me. How about back in those days? I know protection was a big thing. Did they ever go to you, your family, and did you have to?
You know, it's
Did
funny.
you ever get to the point where you had to